We're officially halfway through the final season of Better Call Saul. The mid-season finale for season 6 happened last night, and it ended on a bang, a cliffhanger. I didn't see that coming. But yeah, we're going to talk about Better Call Saul, mid-season 6, my thoughts, my views, opinions, spoilers, obviously. You have been warned. By the way, I did do a season 5 review some time ago. I'll link it below in the description section. I'm a huge Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad fan. I think that the work that Vince Gillian and Peter Gould does is amazing. And back to back, these are two extremely solid shows. And the way that Better Call Saul is fleshing out as the prequel to Breaking Bad fits rather nicely into the overall universe. It's very bittersweet because I think we have, 6 episodes left, which start back up July 11th. And yeah, I will review those half once the series finale rolls out. But part of me kind of doesn't want this adventure to end, but I know that all good things must eventually come to an end. And so must be with Better Call Saul. First off, real quick, spoilers will be mentioned, but right now I will say that season 6 so far is very solid. Yeah, there was definitely some slow burn from the beginning to the midpoint of season 6, and there was definitely some moments here and there along the way, but overall it is turning out to be a very strong final season for Better Call Saul. Whether or not they deliver in the second half, I guess we'll find out by the series finale. But I have faith in Vince Gillian as well as Peter Gould. Everybody involved with Better Call Saul. The main actors, of course, include Bob Odenkirk as Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill, Gene, whatever you wish to call him, Slippy Jimmy. Then you have Rhea Seehorn as Kim Wexler, Jonathan Banks as Mike Ehrmantraut, Giancarlo Esposito as Gus Fring, Michael Mando as Nacho, Tony Dalton as Lalo, and Patrick Fabian as Howard Hamlin. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of great supporting actors and actresses that make up Better Call Saul and the world of Breaking Bad, as well as the writers, the crew. So I tip my hat to everybody that's involved with Better Call Saul. So let's get into the spoilers, shall we, when it comes to mid-season 6 of Better Call Saul. By the way, let me know your thoughts, your views, your opinions regarding Better Call Saul season 6 so far below in the comments section. Season 6 picks up with the aftermath of Season 5 with the attempted assassination of Lalo down in Mexico at his compound. Nacho is attempting to flee Mexico as well as the Salamanca cartel. He's being hidden by Gus's allies, but it seems like Gus's men are going to basically hand over Nacho. But in a final act of defiance, Nacho basically confronts Hector and tells him that he's the one that switched the pills, which ultimately led to Hector being confined to a wheelchair. And obviously that final act by Nacho was pretty badass. I was hoping for a happy ending for Nacho, a cat and mouse game between him and Lalo, where eventually Lalo would be defeated by Nacho. Nacho would make it safely back to the States with his dad, and they would flee somewhere. Unfortunately, that did not transpire, but I guess that's what makes this show even better, is because even if you predict what's going to happen, most likely that's not going to be the case. Sometimes it does, but a lot of the times, no. And unfortunately, that did not happen for Nacho. He made a deal with Gus and Mike in order to protect his father, and so he basically handed himself over to the Salamancas, but not before, as I mentioned, basically confronting Hector and telling him that, hey, you're in that wheelchair because of me. And a final awesome performance by Michael Mando as he blew himself away, going out on his terms. So rip Nacho, you went out like a Chad. Meanwhile, Kim and Jimmy's plot to force Howard and Clifford's law firms to ultimately settle the Sandpiper lawsuit, which has been around for several years. So this has been an extremely slow arc, but the payoff is coming by the halfway point of season 6. And they really put a lot of things into motion, Kim and Jimmy, and ultimately it really does pay off for them. For Howard, not so much. Meanwhile, Lalo survives the assassination attempt in his compound in Mexico. He heads off to Europe to uncover Gus's secret project, and he ends up in Germany, and he goes, I think, one or two other places. He gets the answers he's looking for. He returns to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and does this stakeout in the final episode outside of the laundromat where the secret meth lab is still being built. I mean, the hole has been dug. You can see that work has begun, but it's not quite there yet to when we see it in Breaking Bad. But Lalo has gathered enough information to be convinced that Gus is obviously up to something with the meth lab, and whatever it is, it's not going to be good for the Salamancas, but he still needs proof. And before he ends up going into the lab, because his plan was to sneak into the laundry room and kill any guards that got into his way and find his way to wherever they're hiding this secret lab, he calls the nursing home where Hector is, and then to his surprise, he realizes that Gus has tapped the phones at the nursing home, and then he mentions to Hector how he's going to go forward with plan A. And obviously Hector's not happy about that because he keeps ringing the bell. And you can see the panic on Hector's face, worried that Lalo may not make it out alive. So going back to some other story arcs, throughout the first half of season 6, Gus has increased his protection at his restaurants, as well as at the laundromat and at his home, and across the way at this dummy house he's been hiding at with this tunnel. So Mike, Gus, Taras, they've added more security detail to not only Gus, but some other allies that have helped Gus along the way, including Kim and Jimmy, even though Kim and Jimmy obviously are not aware of Gus's secret identity. But Mike goes to Kim at a diner and lets her know the bad news that Lalo has survived his assassination attempt in Mexico. And Kim does not tell Jimmy. And unfortunately, eventually Jimmy will find out before this first half of season 6 is over. Ultimately, Howard is bested and humiliated by Kim and Jimmy's plot. Now, for the record, I always thought that Howard was a decent guy. Yeah, he's a lawyer. Ever since the first season, it was implied that it was Howard that was preventing Saul from becoming a lawyer. But the plot twist was it was actually his brother Chuck, who was a senior partner at HHM, who was trying to stop Jimmy from becoming a lawyer. And Howard was actually kind of on board with Jimmy being a lawyer because he saw how ambitious and how smart Jimmy was. But Chuck proved to be the one that was getting in Jimmy's way. So you have this final meeting with Clifford's law firm, along with Howard's law firm, HHM, and the clients and those representing Sandpiper. And the ultimate plan is to continue this into litigation in order to get as much money as possible for HHM, Clifford's law firm, as well as the clients of Sandpiper. However, Jimmy and Kim want this to be wrapped up now, and they have a variety of reasons. One is Jimmy wants the money now. He doesn't really want to wait a few more years just to get a little bit more money. Plus, there's a moral reason why Jimmy and Kim want to wrap it up as soon as possible, because the clients are obviously senior citizens, and who knows how many years they have left in order to enjoy the settlement from the Sandpiper lawsuit. Meanwhile, you have these law firms trying to drag it out as long as possible. It does definitely come across as greedy, but Clifford and Howard both try to justify why they feel like they need to drag it out for at least 2 more years, maybe longer. So throughout this first half of season 6, Jimmy and Kim have had this plot against Howard and trying to frame him with drugs and prostitutes, as well as this entire arc where Howard hires a private investigator to keep tabs on Saul Goodman. Meanwhile, Saul actually ends up pulling a fast one on Howard, going into, I guess, the phone book at HHM and replacing the detective agency that HHM works with a number to a con man who poses as a PI for Howard. So while Howard thinks the PI is working for him, he's a double agent for Jimmy and Kim. And at the end of the day, it ends up backfiring on Howard, and Howard gets unintentionally laced with some sort of drug at the meeting. He's convinced that this judge that's the mediator has been given $20,000 by Saul, even though it was just an actor posing as the judge with these photos that have been conveniently switched out by the time it's all revealed. And it's basically just embarrassed and humiliated Howard. And Clifford's now convinced that Howard does have a drug and prostitution problem and that he has ruined everything when it comes to the case they were building up against Sandpiper. And so they're forced to settle. Therefore, the clients are going to get some money. And Jimmy, who's also going to get money because he's the one who I think initiated the Sandpiper lawsuit. So he was going to ultimately gain either way, but he ends up making less money. But as a result, that doesn't really matter to Jimmy or Kim. And Howard obviously shows up at their apartment drunk with a bottle of wine, mentioning how every time him and Chuck won a case, they would celebrate over this bottle of wine or champagne. And he brought it for Jimmy and Kim. And before he knocks at the door, there's a flicker of a candlelight, which is kind of ominous. So you're wondering who's showing up at the door. Turns out to be Howard. He's drunk. And he basically confronts Kim and Jimmy, asks them exactly why did they do this? Why did they go out of their way to try and ruin him in order to get the Sandpiper deal finalized? Was it just about money? Did they do it just because they could get away with it and because they get off on it? Unfortunately, somebody else shows up at the apartment, and it's also ominous by a second candle flicker as Lalo ends up at Jimmy and Kim's apartment. The first time he showed up in season 5, it was pretty tense. Fortunately, Kimmy was able to convince Lalo at the time that Jimmy was on his side and that Jimmy basically went through hell to try to help out Lalo in season 5. And Lalo ended up running off to Mexico with Nacho, and that's where season 5 ended with the attempted assassination of Lalo, which obviously failed. So now Lalo is back at Kim and Jimmy's apartment with Howard there. And right now, Kim and Jimmy are panicking because they know what kind of person Lalo is. He's a psychopath. He's a serial killer. He's a murderer. He'll come across as a nice guy one second, but then the next second, he'll murder you without even giving it a second thought. And they're now worried for Howard's life. For one moment ago, they were just like, oh, Howard, you're just making stuff up. Whatever, Howard. You're drunk. Let's call you a cab. Just go home. But Howard's, like, hey, if it takes me the rest of my life, I'm going to expose you to. I'm going to bring you two down for what you did. Unfortunately, the rest of his life was only a few more minutes once Lalo showed up. And of course, Howard, none the wiser as to who Lalo is, just some random friend of Kim and Jimmy's. Unfortunately, Lalo, puts a silencer on his pistol, and Howard knows that something bad is about to happen. But before Howard can leave, unfortunately, Lalo shoots him in the head, killing him dead. All because Lalo needed to talk to his lawyers. Wrong place, wrong time, Howard. You will be missed. So we have lost Nacho and we have lost Howard, and we're only at the halfway point of season 6, the final season of Better Call Saul. But there's an extra scene at the end of the episode, this black and white scene, which often was flash forward scenes at the beginning of seasons 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There was not a flash forward scene at the beginning of season 6. It was actually a scene of what ends up being, Saul's mansion, being having items taken out of it, I'm guessing, by the police, the feds, including his Cadillac and some other things. That's how the season begins in his mansion in color. But this mid-season finale ends in black and white, and it looks like it's still their apartment, but it's in black and white, and there's nobody there. It just shows their apartment, and you hear Jimmy say this: so, after all that, a happy ending. Once again, the mid-season finale of season 6 of Better Call Saul ended with a bang. And personally, I grew to like Howard, especially after it turned out that it was Chuck, not Howard, that was sabotaging Jimmy's efforts, near the end of the first season. Then I started thinking, okay, Howard might not be such a bad guy after all. He's just an upstanding suit lawyer. He's very professional. And unfortunately, we also learned that he has been sleeping in the guest room because his marriage has been on the rocks. And before Lalo showed up, Howard was like, yeah, I know I'm going to jump back. I know HHM is going to survive. We're going to get a settlement. We're going to get some money. But, obviously Howard has been forever affected by what Jimmy and Kim did to him because of Sandpiper. And he was going to dedicate the rest of his days to try and bring down Jimmy and Kim. There is the possibility that Howard's death inadvertently brings things to an end between Kim and Jimmy, because there are some uncertain fates right now when it comes to characters from Better Call Saul. Now, the Breaking Bad characters, we don't really have to worry about them too much because we know what's going to happen to them. Gus, Mike, Hector, Victor, the Salamanca twins, along with Tyrus, they're obviously not going to die in Better Call Saul. Lack of suspense is kind of a con, I would say, when it comes to the prequel. But it is cool to see their backstories being fleshed out a little bit more. But we know that those characters are not going to suffer at all. They're going to be fine by the time Better Call Saul is over because their fates are sealed by the end of Breaking Bad. It's Kim's fates, along with Lalo's, and Jimmy's fate that are all uncertain right now. Especially Jimmy's fate post-Breaking Bad, where he's in hiding and he's in disguise as quote-unquote Gene, the humble manager at a Cinnabon in a mall up in Nebraska, I believe. But yeah, the first half of season 6, very strong overall. Slow burn at points. It did get a little boring here and there, but that's to be expected from a show like Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad. And it was definitely worth the payoff at the end of the mid-season finale. I did not expect Howard to actually die there. I get the feeling that most people, especially his wife and everybody at HHM and fellow lawyers, friends, colleagues, family, are never going to learn the truth about what happened to Howard. Most are just going to assume after the Sandpiper fallout and the accusations of drugs and prostitution that he simply decided to take his own life. But I do have some predictions before we wrap up. I think that Kim is going to survive. Obviously, things are being left rather tense in Kim and Jimmy's apartment with dead Howard laying on the floor, a puddle of blood, and Lalo with a gun in his hand. Despite the fact that Nacho, Howard are both dead, Kim's fate currently uncertain. Doesn't look too good for her at the moment with Lalo right there with his gun and a silencer on it. We know that Jimmy is obviously going to survive past the events of Breaking Bad, but right now we don't know what's going to happen with Kim. My prediction is she will survive, but I think the death of Howard is going to be a breaking point for her and may ultimately lead to her fleeing for her life and maybe contacting the vacuum guy. Yes, I know the actor that played the vacuum guy passed away, sadly, but it was implied in a veterinarian book that they're going to come in contact with the vacuum guy, at least off screen, or maybe they pre-recorded some stuff prior to his death because he did record El Camino, and he did record a scene for Better Call Saul at the beginning of season 5, if I'm not mistaken, and get in contact either on screen or off screen with the vacuum guy. Maybe they had a few extra scenes recorded where he's like, oh, hello, Mrs. Wexler. How are you doing? And he's going to set her up with a new name, new life, once again off screen in Nebraska. And I think that's where she's originally from. And that's where Jimmy ultimately ends up with a new alias known as Gene. So yeah, I think that Kim survives. Lalo is going to be killed. This is my prediction about Lalo. I don't think he's going to survive Gus, Mike, and Tyrus. I think they're going to set a trap for him. He's going to walk right into it. And I think ultimately he's going to be killed in the very pit where the meth lab is going to end up being built because Gus hid his Derringer down in that pit where the meth lab is going to ultimately be. So obviously Gus is planning ahead, knowing that Lalo is ultimately going to end up there because that is what Lalo's looking for. Therefore, Gus is thinking a few steps ahead like he always does, and he knows that eventually all roads lead to the meth lab, and that is where Lalo is going to meet his end at the hands of Gus, Mike, Tyrus, maybe even Victor. And perhaps they end up burying him inside the lab itself before it's complete. So going back to that line by Saul in the black and white scene at the end where he says, "So after all that, a happy ending." I think that what Jimmy, Saul, Gene is referring to is Kim having a happy ending, not him. And what I mean by that is chances are if Kim survives and relocates to Nebraska and ends up separating from Jimmy, divorcing him, having nothing to do with him any further after what happens with Howard, maybe she falls in love with somebody else, marries a decent man, and ends up having a family. And Gene, meanwhile, is having to watch from afar while remaining in hiding as the manager of the Cinnabon. And perhaps he ultimately changes his ID and flees once again because he has been exposed by somebody. And once again, I think that was the season 5 opener where somebody actually recognized him from the billboards. Like, hey, you're Saul Goodman. The mustache doesn't fool me. Even though, once again, Jimmy decided not to flee by the end of that flash forward. Perhaps he's going to change his mind before the end of the series. We'll just have to wait and see. There's also a possibility that Jimmy finally gets caught by law enforcement, or he dies or gets killed in the process, or ends up dying in order to save Kim. I don't think he's going to die like Walter did, but it is possible that he could find himself dying of a heart attack or stroke, or maybe he takes his own life, or perhaps he does sacrifice himself to save Kim, even if Kim never realized that her life was in danger. And Gene, Jimmy, Saul did one heroic act in order to ensure that she would survive, even if it ultimately cost him his life. But I do feel like Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould will probably do something different with Jimmy than what they did with Walter at the end of Breaking Bad. Of all these scenarios, I think the two most likely is either Jimmy is going to flee, change his ID again, and continue to be in hiding and in fear for the rest of his life alone without Kim, without his law practice, without all that glory and money that he built up over the years in Albuquerque. Or he'll get caught by law enforcement and perhaps he'll be forced to defend himself in a court of law. And that's when you'll see Saul Goodman make a return at the end, dazzling the judge and the jury, and somehow manage to get himself off and have the charges dropped, or else he manages to get himself a lighter sentence, which I highly doubt. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like either fleeing for his life, remaining in hiding for the rest of his years till he dies, or being caught by law enforcement are probably the two more logical endings for Jimmy McGill, aka Saul Goodman. Another reason why I don't think he's going to be killed is because almost everybody that would want him dead, they themselves are already dead. The Salamancas are dead. Walter is dead. Gus is dead. Mike is dead. Nacho is dead. Jesse is up in Alaska. I don't think Jesse wants anything to do with Saul. In fact, I think they were friends. I think there were times when Saul actually helped Jesse here and there. Howard is dead, and of course, his own brother, Chuck, is dead. Now, Lalo right now, his fate remains uncertain, but I'm fairly confident that Lalo is not going to survive the events of Better Call Saul. I don't think that Gus, Mike, Tyrus, or Victor are going to allow Lalo to remain running around causing trouble. So I think that Lalo will be dead before Better Call Saul is over. The only one that remains uncertain is Huel. Obviously, he's still alive at the end of Breaking Bad. And I know I'm leaving a few other characters out, but I'm just focusing on those that directly connect back to Saul. To be honest, I don't think Huel would want to kill Jimmy or Saul. I don't even think Huel's capable of killing anybody. He's a thief. He's kind of a con man, but I don't think Huel's a murderer. So maybe Huel ends up getting off on a light charge, or maybe because he keeps his mouth shut, there's nothing the feds or the police can do about Huel, and he just ends up taking whatever money he has, leaving Albuquerque, heading back to Coshada, Louisiana. And maybe eventually Jimmy flees to Coshada, Louisiana, and then they get a house, they hang out, they go fishing, they go hunting, and they eat crawfish. If that's the case, then there might be a reason for me to hop in the truck and drive down to Coshada, which is only about an hour from where I live. Anyways, that is my review and predictions when it comes to Better Call Saul, the first half of the final season, season 6. And wow, what a strong first half. Hopefully the second half is just as strong. if not stronger, and delivers an epic series finale for Better Call Saul. Your thoughts, your views, your opinions regarding Better Call Saul, and your predictions. What do you think is going to become of Kim, Jimmy, as well as Lalo? And who was your favorite character in Better Call Saul up to this point? Your thoughts, your views, your opinions, as always, welcome below in the comments section.